be a really, really nice compliment, because it's something that the idea of this book is to really refine our sensitivity, our lens, our view of the world, so that we look at things with a positive eye, which ultimately is going to translate into us being more confident, trusting people. When I mean confident, meaning approaching the world with the confidence in the creator, the reliance, the trust, right? That state of not rejecting, of not resisting, I guess it's a better word, of not resisting life situations, because we trust and we know with all confidence, all security, where they're coming from, that not only that they are good, but that we are in good hands, we're taken care of. So I want to actually start with the introduction, because he writes a really beautiful introduction with some nuanced points that sometimes we might overlook, particularly who this book is trying to, who the model of the book is. And it's obviously the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He's basing this on the personality of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, how he approached life. And the nuance here is like that maybe often we might think that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, well, as a tzaddik, maybe, you know, they come wired with this positivity bias. And I'm sure there's something to that. However, we're soon going to discover something very interesting that the Rebbe said about himself, which I think is very enlightening and at the same time very helpful to us and very empowering. So before we get that, let's just start with how he starts the book. And he says the following: during a private audience with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, a bureau chief for National Jewish Paper extolled his periodical, and he said the following. He was praising his newspaper, right? He says, "Our publication is independent and completely objective." And of course, you can already imagine that the Rebbe stopped him right there and said, "Independent, perhaps, but objective? There is no such thing. It is humanly impossible to be completely objective." And again, this is one of those subtle nuance points that I think why this introduction is so helpful, because we tend to live in a society that thinks that there is objectivity. And here, as Jewish people, we have to remember that there is no such thing. The only objectivity there is God's wisdom, the Torah. Everything else is subjective. So anybody who says that they're being objective, no, we all have biases, okay? That is the nature of being a human being, a created entity in the world as a human. I don't know if the cows have bias, right? I know they're wired to do certain things, but intellectual beings like humans, we are programmed in a way that we're going to absorb information, right? And by nurture or nature, we are going to develop certain biases, okay? So the Rebbe says there's no such thing. It is humanly impossible to be completely objective. Every person has a bias of some kind. I understand the Rebbe's words to mean that while one can live without an agenda, one cannot live without bias. One cannot live without bias. You have to have something. Through a mix of nature, nurture, and free will, we each possess a certain lens that frames and forms the way we see ourselves, others, and the world around us. And it's almost like we don't have to say it, but we do have to say it, because we live in a world that doesn't believe this, right? We know as Jews that the Torah should inform the way we see the world, and that should be the lens through which we see the world. That is a certain color, that is a certain bias, it's a certain perspective, okay? It is simply not possible to erase all traces of our personality. So it's not just that we have the objective truth of the Torah, but we, each individual person, the home in which we were brought up, the different experiences we've had, our nature, our personality, all of these things, past experiences, deeply held beliefs from our observations, expressions, or actions, no matter how hard we may try, we have them, right? This frame that we adopt, whether consciously or unconsciously, deeply impacts the way we perceive reality, right? That's the lens through which we see the world. This matrix of understanding becomes our operating system, so to speak. That's the default mechanism through which we construe and contextualize. We react and we reinforce. We interpret and we identify every event and interaction we experience. And you will see that people who have similar biases like you, and I'm using the word bias as like a lens, like the similar lens to you, you will probably relate to more, right? We tend to relate better to people who have similar value systems that have shaped them, the similar upbringings, right? Because it means that we see the world in a very similar way. Like in the, even within marriage, right? When we choose a marriage partner, right? Of course, we're completely different. But in certain fundamental things, we're going to have a very similar lens of looking at things, right? So based on this fact of subjectivity, the following questions arise. Okay, so what are our biases? What are the default frames through which we see the world? How can they be adjusted to better serve ourselves and others, right? Because it doesn't mean that we can't change it, right? We can change it. We're supposed to refine ourselves, and this is something that can be refined. If our biases inevitably color the way we interpret and experience the world, and I think the word experience here is very, very important and very telling, and we'll discuss in a second, it follows that a primary focus of life should be to assess and reset our biases. Now, he's going to tell us the words of the Rebbe to an individual who happened to be, let's call him a complainer. He was one to complain. Like there's a person who happened to complain about his life circumstances. And I know for sure, like many of us, well, I'll speak for myself. I know sometimes I'm in like this stage where I begin to complain. And I think we've talked about this, right? Pushing ourselves to do the exercise, no complaining challenge, right? If we could try to 1 week and instead of complaining, right away switch to being grateful. And it's actually pretty difficult if you've tried it. I don't know if anybody's tried it, but right, to change, rewire from complaining about something to just keeping quiet, or if we're going to say something, just say something you're grateful for, right? Okay, so this person is coming to the Rebbe, and apparently the person had a tendency towards complaining about his life and the circumstances in his life. And the Rebbe's response is the following. He says, in our world, everything is a mixture of good and bad, right? That's the way it is. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. So again, it's we can do that. We can choose what we focus on. We can focus on the good and we can focus on the not good. How instructive is that which our sages tell us that Adam was an ingrate, the first man creation. Our sages say that he was an ingrate. Even before he was banished from the Garden of Eden, while living in a literal paradise, right? He complained about his circumstances. On the other hand, says the Rebbe, there were Jewish men and women who thanked and blessed the Creator and recited the morning blessings while living through the most horrifying times in the German concentration camps. Ultimately, everyone's circumstances will be somewhere between these two extremes. Everyone's circumstances will be somewhere between complete ultimate paradise that Adam had, living in Gan Eden in a perfect world, right? And living in the most harrowing, horrible circumstances. And then he says, my point in saying this is not to admonish you. It is simply to underscore the reality. So he's giving him a wake-up call, right? To underscore a certain reality. The reality is that the type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in large measure on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or the negative. Like we said before, that's to say that we all have the capability to focus on one or the other. It takes willpower, right? And it might take, willing yourself to rewire, right? To reset those biases, but it can be done. So it's to say that our perspectives are so powerful that they can lead us to find fault with paradise, like Adam, or to express gratitude even while in a state of extreme suffering. Or maybe we should say in a state of extreme pain, because again, as we've learned many times, suffering is also a choice, right? Again, obviously, there is extreme pain that can lead to suffering. But here, the point is that we get to choose, and a person can be in, let me just continue because he says it better than me. He says, he continues and he tells us that there was an encounter or a disclosure to one of the Rebbe's Hasidim, Reb Beryl Eunuch, where he alluded to his focus on seeing things positively as stemming from his harrowing past. And this is so telling, where the Rebbe says about himself, he said, I worked on myself to always look at things in a positive light. Otherwise, I could not have survived. So that's why I was telling you guys at the beginning that it's so interesting. When I remember vividly reading this and being shocked, because you'd think that a person of the stature of the Rebbe and of the it's so notable how his positivity bias, you cannot, when you learn the Rebbe's letters, when you learn the Rebbe's Sichas, you cannot notice it, okay? It is so impactful. It's such a differentiator. You'd think the Rebbe was wired this way. And here the Rebbe is saying about himself that he worked on himself to look at things in a positive light. Otherwise, I could not have survived. And we'll see soon that the Rebbe did not have an easy life at all. So this deceptively simple statement encapsulates the basic premise of this book, okay? Namely, that living a life of positivity is a matter of choice, not circumstance, and derives from perspective, not personality. So it's not that you're born with it, it's that you develop a perspective. It's not circumstance, it's that you choose it, okay? It is not the events of our lives that shape us, but the meanings that we assign to those events. In other words, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And today it's trending. It's definitely trending, this idea that we create our own reality and quantum physics and all of that, right? And so this is literal Torah, right? And here we see it. We're learning it inside. We're going to learn. The Rebbe is going to walk us. Mendel Kalmenson is going to walk us through how the Rebbe viewed many, many circumstances and how the Torah helps us view circumstances. And that again, that's why I said the word experience is so telling, because this is going to affect how we experience our life. Our perception of things is what creates the reality that we're living in, right? That's why he's contrasting. The Rebbe is giving that man this extreme example that you could be living in paradise and be complaining about it, be experiencing it as a negative thing worth complaining. And you could be living in literal hell, right? In the concentration camps and still utter the morning blessings, expressing gratitude to your creator. So ultimately, the greatest testing grounds for any theory is the laboratory of life. And that's what makes this book on positivity different from many. For if, as the saying goes, history is philosophy teaching through examples, this book teaches the philosophy of positivity by way of a living example, demonstrating how the Rebbe interacted with real people, reacting in real time to real life situations. Now, it is important to note that the redemptive perspectives presented in this book are not those of a man who lived a life of peace and privilege. So again, this is another one of those subtleties that we need to understand. The person who's helping us have this positivity bias did have his struggles. They are the insights of a man who lived through, look at these, waves of pogroms, the killing fields of World War I, a typhus epidemic, a refugee crisis, the persecution and forced exile of his father, whom he never saw again, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of communism, World War II, the brutal murder of his brother, grandmother, and numerous other relatives at the hands of the Nazis, Imam Shemach, and life of childlessness. And many of you might know more details about this, but anybody who knows more details understands that this is kind of shorthanding it, but because the truth is, when it says a refugee crisis, the Rebbe as a child really lived through his parents, in his home, this was happening, right? How they took in so many refugees during the First World War. Again, the exile of his father and the pain that not only the fact that he never saw his father again, his parents weren't at his own wedding, the fact that his mother also had to suffer, well, again, taking care of his father in exile, and the pain of not seeing his mother for so many years and then being reunited with his mother, and so many details of just all these experiences, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of communism, obviously the war, and the murder of his brother. Same thing with his sister-in-law, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we all know a life of childlessness. Okay, so these are the teachings of a man who personally absorbed and carried the crushing pain of hundreds of thousands of individuals who sought him out for healing, comfort, love, acceptance, help, and sometimes simply a reason to live. So not only that, but he's taking on the weight of the world on his shoulders and the pain and agony and struggle of so many individuals. And I don't like, I I don't know about you, but like sometimes, if anybody's had the experience of having like, a couple of friends that call you and they're going through a rough time, and and you have empathy and you're there for them, it can be, I mean, I'm not like, we all know it can be a really draining experience, right? We're not built to sustain. Like sometimes we also need to like take a breathe and say, oh my gosh, like this is really impacting me, like, right, the problems of the people around me. And sometimes we have to take a step back and recharge in order to be there for them once again. Imagine the Rebbe did this day in and day out, day in and day out for so many people, right? Through letters. I just read a beautiful story. I didn't read it, I heard it, about the Rebbe received, I don't know how many hundreds of letters a day. And somebody came up with a beautiful idea to gift the Rebbe an envelope opener, one of these like little gadgets that would open the envelope, so the Rebbe wouldn't have to open the envelope and waste the Rebbe his time and his energy like fussing with the envelope. And when it was gifted to the Rebbe gave it back and said, I believe, oh, now I'm blanking out on the story, but I believe he said to his secretary to pass on the message that I think it made noise. It makes a noise. And so the man who gifted him this nice, very thoughtful gift went and he worked with a company that manufactures the envelope opener to design it in a way that it didn't make noise. And lo and behold, they were able to achieve it. And he comes back with this beautiful, thoughtful gift to the Rebbe. And it turns out that the Rebbe gave it back. And the response was that many people seal their envelopes with their tears. It's not just their saliva. It's not just Scotch tape, but it's with their tears. And how could he tear the envelope? How could he open the envelope not with his hands when these envelopes were sealed with tears, right? So talking about that level of empathy and connection to human pain, right? Okay, so this is the Rebbe who really, really took on all of this. And finally, they are the working principles of a man who made an active choice to consciously curate a philosophy and habits of thought, speech, and action firmly rooted in 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom, understanding, and knowledge that all coalesce into what we refer to in this book as the Rebbe's positivity bias. Once pointed out, as I said before, the Rebbe's positivity bias is impossible to miss. You can't miss it, okay? As the hundreds of stories, letters, anecdotes, and vignettes in the following pages bring to life, the Rebbe's positivity bias illuminated every corner of his thoughts, every nuance of his speech, and infused in his every action, reaction, and interaction with the power of positive living. But again, I want to emphasize the Rebbe himself said, I worked on myself to always look at things in a positive light. Otherwise, I could not have survived. So all of this that he is illuminating every corner of his thoughts, every nuance of his speech, and infuses every action, reaction, and interaction with the power of positive living is work that he was able to do, and means that we have what to do and we can do it. Ultimately, however, this book was not written to tell the story of one man's courageous efforts to design a life of positivity. It really is a book to provide us with the principles and practices, the wisdom and the tools and the insights and the inspiration that will empower us to personalize, internalize, and actualize our own positivity bias. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Kalmenson says in his introduction. So now he's going to start the book with the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is the world is God's garden. And we've talked about this several times in our class that the Rebbe's, this is, I guess, the hallmark of the Rebbe's view of the world, and that is what we're about to delve into, which is that the world is God's garden. And that's how the Rebbe began his leadership. And we see throughout that was literally, I guess, the vision, right? That was like the grand vision, and everything else that we see is all derived from there. So in 1951, in 7070 Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, on the 10th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat, you had a small group of Hasidim that gathered together in the middle of a winter, right? Shvat is in the winter, anxiously waiting to hear the first words from their new Rebbe. Okay, the Rebbe was about to take the mantle of leadership. It was a very humble gathering. And again, it was the remnant of once glorious Hasidic dynasty known as Chabad Lubavitch, which in the past had numbered in the hundreds of thousands, with centers and outposts active across much of Eastern Europe. Many of the people present there had lost much of their families to Stalinist Russia or during the war, while others had ventured across the Atlantic much earlier and had begun to assimilate in the surrounding American culture to varying degrees. As you see a lot of footage from those early days, you have a clear mix of people. Even in the early days of the Rebbe's leadership, one of the Rebbe's requirements to be Masader Kedushin at weddings, later on the Rebbe stopped doing that, right? He couldn't officiate so many weddings. But in the early days, one of the early requirements that the Rebbe had was that the man would grow a beard. Okay. It was the 50s. Men in America, Jewish men, were not wearing beards. Again, shaitels. I mean, these were things that the Rebbe reintroduced into Jewish American culture. So you had those early days, people who came from families of Hasidim, but had assimilated to a certain extent or adopted certain American customs. So you had people with no beards. You had Hasidim who still, had the beards and had come here from, horrible situations, from escaping Stalin or from the war, pretty much. And we've talked about the experience of, that 1955 Purim Farbrengen I've told you about before, where the Rebbe talked about the challenge of wealth, and only 6 people raised their hands. And we talked about the fact that people in that generation came here penniless. So like to ask for wealth was like the most crass thing you can imagine. Who's asking for wealth? You know what I mean? So it was like beyond their comprehension. So anyway, but that's kind of like the scene of what you have here. And yet here they all were waiting and wondering what would become of them and their way of life in this new land. What would be their marching orders into the future? It had been exactly 1 year since the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak Schneerson, had passed away, creating this leadership vacuum in this tight-knit community of pious scholars and mystics, simple Jews and survivors. During the interim period, the future of the movement had been uncertain. As the new Rebbe, who was going to now become the Lubavitcher Rebbe had consistently rejected all invitations to assume the position. People kept asking the Rebbe to assume the mantle of leadership, and the Rebbe was not accepting it. And there were a lot of debates and deliberations going on, like who's going to lead them, what's going to be, where would they turn for comfort, strength, and guidance in life and in Torah. With all those questions up in the air, coupled with the traumas of life under Soviet regime and the aftershocks of the war, it is easy to imagine this small group of largely Yiddish-speaking immigrants feeling profusely distraught and disoriented. Okay, that was the kind of like the chaos of that year. Within this relative chaos, the Rebbe revealed a hidden order. Picking up precisely where his father-in-law, the 6th Rebbe, had left off, the new Rebbe began his inaugural address with the well-known words from Shir HaShirim, from Song of Songs, Basi Legani, I have come into my garden. So King Shlomo has this Shir HaShirim that says this verse, I have come into my garden. Who's the I? God. God says, I have come into my garden, the Shekhinah, actually, okay? The divine presence. And these were the very same opening words quoted by Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak in his final discourse. So the final maimar, the final discourse of his father-in-law, had these opening words. And it amounted to sort of a last will and testament of sorts for his followers. And it was published exactly 1 year earlier to the day. This subtle act of spiritual connection, the act is that he continued with the same words, threading the proverbial needle from one Rebbe to the next, was so important to the Rebbe that for the next 4 decades, the Rebbe would continue to review and reveal deeper and higher aspects of the sixth Rebbe, of his final teaching every year at the annual Hasidic gathering that took place on the anniversary of his father-in-law, of his father-in-law's passing, which was that day, Yud Shvat. So every year for the next 40 years, every Yud Shvat, the Rebbe continued elaborating on a concept, delving deeper into this discourse Basi Legani. Okay, so this is how he begins. This is how he takes on the mantle of leadership, and it's tied into the way his father-in-law left, what he left us. Okay. And this mission statement of sorts is so important that every single year on the anniversary, he renews and he goes back to the mission. He goes deeper into the mission. So you can imagine. So people, many men go through the cycle and they learn every year. You learn a different year of Basi Legani, right? Okay. So ultimately, both Rebbes interpreted the verse of Basi Legani in a profoundly creative and inspiring way. Despite all of the eruptive uncertainty and destructive chaos punctuating the recent past and still defining the times in many ways, the world is not a cruel and meaningless mass hurling blindly through space. And for us, this is so relevant, right? Because we now know that the world seems very, very chaotic. I mean, I think I don't like, ever since October 7th, like it has not stopped, right? So we can see these words, like we can perceive this world, God forbid, as cruel and meaningless. God forbid, God forbid. And here the Rebbe is saying the world is a garden. The world is God's garden. This is very important, not just a garden, it's God's garden, his finest creation and chosen abode. Realizing and living this truth largely depends on how one views and understands the world around and within them. Because again, your perspective is going to affect what you live, your reality. So how you live this is going to be affected by how you perceive things. So everything starts with your view, okay? So when you look out at the world and into your soul, do you see a wasteland or a wonderland? Do you see a desert or an oasis? What does a person see? What a person sees is what they are going to experience. According to Hasidic philosophy, we each have the power to define and influence our experience based on our perception. So again, I told you, like we're talking about this in manifesting and quantum physics and all these things, but this is Torah, okay? Knowing this with every fiber of his being, the Rebbe rigorously developed and consistently expressed what I would call a profound and programmatic positivity bias to life, to Torah, and to people, leading him to seek and find the pure and positive essence within everyone and everything. And that again is hallmark of the Rebbe, right? The ability to look at the soul of things. And that's what we're going to see in this book. Literally, that's how we're going to shape our bias. That's how we're going to turn it into a positive bias, by being able to peel through the weeds and the schmutz and look at the essence of things, okay? The soul of things. Always seeing the temple beneath the ruins, actively seeking the positive aspect or opportunity in any given situation, believing deeply in God's ultimate goodness and immanent presence, living with purpose, responsibility, and meaning. These qualities provide the psycho-spiritual foundation of the Rebbe's radical theory and redemptive practice of life, because that's what this is. A positivity bias is a redemptive outlook. You're taking something that looks not good and you're redeeming it. You're literally turning the galus into geula, okay? Why? And like we've talked many times, right? By introducing the aleph to gola, you introduce the aleph and you have geula, okay? The aleph is the aluf shel olam, the champion of the world, or champion or chairman of the world, okay? So cultivating this which is God, did I say that? God Almighty, okay? Cultivating this consciousness was his way of tending God's garden while helping each of us become better, holier, and happier gardeners ourselves, because we're all tending to the garden. Again, what do we experience? Like, we're here to live in this world, so we can go through this world, right, and perceive it as something horrible, horrific. I'm just going through the motions in this deep, dark place that's out to get me. Or I could actually experience this place as this wonderful, beautiful, meaningful experience, and right? And that's the goal. Okay. So quite simply, this positivity bias, which is the key to unlocking God's secret garden, became a cornerstone of the Rebbe's teachings over the next 4 decades, expressing itself in myriad ways, especially as he continued to elaborate on Basi Lagani year after year. Okay, so now we start with a section he calls What a Wonderful World. So 22 years later, as I said, every year he developed this further. So in 1972, on Yud Shvat, again, the 10th of Shvat of the year 5732, 1972, the Rebbe again expounded on Basi Lagani, and he addressed the potential cognitive dissonance that a person can experience when comparing the contention of this teaching, of the positive bias teaching, right, that the world is God's garden, right, that's wonderful and beautiful, to the world that they actually live in, right? Like, a person could, there's a tension there. Like, no, but I see October 7th. I see rockets. I see everything. I see anti-Semitism. I see all these things. And, and I saw it with my ancestors and my parents and right? Oh, and you're telling me it's a garden? How is this? So what does the Rebbe say? The Rebbe explained, when we look about with physical eyes, we only perceive the physical aspects in all that we see, and we naturally wonder, what is happening with the world? This is crazy. It's good, like it's meshuga, right? The situation is steadily deteriorating from one generation to the next, and even from one year to the next. Goodness does not prevail. Conditions are not improving. Holy and spiritual values do not dominate. I mean, again, this book was written already like way before October 7th, but like and this, what the Rebbe is explaining, was said in 1972. But this is like, we could be hearing these words today, right? Goodness does not prevail, conditions are not improving, holy and spiritual values do not dominate. Like, this is exactly what we're seeing today. So such thoughts easily lead to the conclusion that this world is but a jungle dominated by selfish beasts, all right? And that it certainly does not even remotely resemble a garden that yields delectable fruit. Like, what, right? Like, what are you talking about? Why are you calling this place a garden? Such thoughts also lead to dejection and despair, says the Rebbe. How can we hope to affect and change the world for the better if the situation is consistently degenerating? Okay, so now there's a pause here, and Rabbi Kalmenson is going to tell us that, again, that the shape of our thoughts directly impacts the color of our emotions, right? We know this, right? The tone of our speech, and even the efficacy of our actions, because the garments of our soul, what we really have control over, right, is the levushim, the garments of the soul, the thought, the speech, and the action. So we are able to change those, and believe it or not, it's pretty hard. Like, it's a lifetime of work to do that, right? But how we think is going to affect our emotions, and it's also going to impact the way we behave. Certain thoughts are more likely to lead us down a dark, destructive pathways, while other thoughts have the power to inspire and strengthen us in pursuit of our highest purpose. And this is exactly what we've been doing in this class for the last 4 years, right? We do this time and time again, week in and week out, and we delve through the text on bitachon because we get that godly consciousness into our brain so that we can redirect, right? Whenever our thoughts are going to try to take us into a dark and destructive path, we have a better ability to lead ourselves, right, into another pathway. Okay, so therefore, says the Rebbe, we must know that the world is a garden. And he says, and this is very important, it's not just an utilitarian field that yields grain. So it's not just when he says a garden, he clarifies, I don't mean a field where you have wonderful wheat that is all very good because everybody needs it. We all need to eat, right? It's not just a utilitarian field that yields grain, which is necessary in order to subsist, but it's a luxuriant garden that yields precious fruits that provide color, aroma, flavor, beauty, and pleasure. And there's a sikha that I often quote, and I'm forgetting the year. It's a Tu B'Shvat sikha, where again, the Rebbe delves into this idea of fruit and the fruit of Israel and the fact that we eat the fruit and the fact that the fruit is associated with pleasure versus like something like wheat, etc., and that we specifically on Tu B'Shvat eat the fruit. Anyway, so it just reminded me of that sikha, but I'm not going to go into it. But the idea is that the Rebbe is saying that again, when we talk about fruit in Torah, it has to do with pleasure. It has to do with abundance. It has to do with beauty. Okay, not just things that are utilitarian, like okay, functional, like we need this. No. It's beyond what you need, right? It's the extra. It's the extra color. It's the extra aroma. Okay. So, moreover, this world is not just anyone's garden; it is God's garden. And this is important because the Rebbe says, as the verse states, I have come to my garden, means that its goodness is therefore measured according to his infinite terms. So if we're talking about the garden of the infinite one, Einot Milvado, there's nothing else, right? It's the Ein Sof, then obviously it is, that is all good, then this garden has to be measured. The way you can measure it is in the infinite terms that we can't even relate, but it has to be all good and beautiful, right? With this perspective, we are able to view the world differently. We begin to notice things that we may have missed upon at first glance. When we realize that it is our responsibility, this is important, right? Because we're not passive onlookers here. It is our responsibility to constantly search for God and for the good. We endeavor to look around us and perceive that which is beneath the shell, the fruit that is under the peel, right? That's our job. That's what we're meant to be doing. Furthermore, despite all evidence to the contrary, we are confident that we will successfully uncover the garden that is latent in creation, because the Torah tells us that it is indeed there waiting to be discovered. It's there. We just have to keep doing the work and peeling out the weeds, and you'll be able to see it. Knowing that a precious treasure awaits discovery, we remain focused on our task and do not allow ourselves to be sidetracked by other endeavors. It's like when we go back to the bitachon conversation, right? When we talked about several times that you can live in the problem, God forbid, or you can live in the solution, because the solution exists. Really, the solution is what exists, right? The solution is the reality. God put the problem, but he already created the solution. The solution is there. So it's my choice in my mind to live in the problem or to sidestep it and say, no, I'm choosing to live in the solution because the solution is real, right? It is actually real. That is reality. So we must know that we inhabit a wonderful world, and through contemplating the above, we may assuredly traverse through life, secure in the knowledge that we will find the fruits of God's garden. And remind me, I just remembered a great Ashkacha Pratis story that I have to share with you guys before I forget, because it's so important for us to always share these stories, to cement them in the bank of knowledge of God is there with us constantly. So okay, in the memory bank. Okay, so now we can all read this and it's very nice, and we can all say, and there's a cynic part inside of us is going to say, well, that's easy for you to say, right? And that's right. Like, look, I'm struggling. I've had this struggle, right? So let's see inside what he has to say about this. Easy for you to say. Regardless of how well-intentioned they are, such statements often leave one feeling as if the person saying them must never have experienced true suffering. Like, dude, like, you haven't been through what I've been through, right? However, let's recall that the Rebbe lived through waves of pogroms, a typhus epidemic, a refugee crisis, the killing fields of World War I, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise up of communism, the forced exile of his father, who ended up passing away while in exile, World War II, and childlessness. Again, he repeats it. Additionally, as a Rebbe, and even before, as we will see, his life was dedicated to absorbing and carrying the pain of hundreds of thousands of individuals who came to him for healing, advice, blessing, support, love, acceptance, help, and even a reason to live. Meaning to say, the Rebbe is not oblivious to the fact that the world seems chaotic. The Rebbe is not oh, no, no, no. Like, it's like he lived a sheltered life and he never saw, like, no, the Rebbe is well aware of the darkness. That's what he's telling you. He's well aware. You can't say it's easy for him to say. Similarly, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak, who first introduced his father-in-law, the sixth Rebbe, who first introduced the idea that the world as we know it is yet God's garden, also lived a life of unimaginable pain and suffering, both personal and historical. And we're not going to go into it, but whoever wants can read. I mean, you can read A Prince of Prison. I mean, there's so many. Actually, Friedrich Rebbe was a beautiful writer, wonderful writer. And he was tortured, severely tortured. And anyway, after all, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak was imprisoned. Oh, here it is. Imprisoned, tortured, exiled, and sentenced to death by the Soviets, survived the carpet bombing of Warsaw at the beginning of World War II, suffered from multiple sclerosis, lost a daughter in the Treblinka death camp, witnessed the members of his movement drastically dwindle due to communism and the Holocaust, and saw the widespread assimilation of American Jews upon his arrival. So it's not that either of them are aloof, oblivious. They have no idea what they're talking about. In the Rebbe's own words, all of the above are the views of a man who has seen affliction. And here he's quoting a pasuk from Lamentations is Eicha. I want to say it's Eicha. I'm not sure. I think so. Okay. A man who has seen affliction, who underwent unspeakable suffering both before and after arriving on the welcoming shores of America. He's talking about his father-in-law. And yet, as the Rebbe pointed out in 1972, he was still able to see God's garden beneath all of man's destruction and desecration. So apparently, there is something there for us to look for and to see. The Rebbes had lived through the violent paroxysms. What is that? I need a dictionary. Paroxysms of a world gone mad, and witnessed up close the most civilized of nations, quote unquote, most civilized of nations, quote unquote, as it was transformed almost overnight into the cruelest of killing machines. Okay. So we're very familiar with the history of Nazi Germany, and we're living through, we're living through something here very similar, obviously. Okay. So we know exactly what this is about. Suffering alongside millions of their brethren, they looked on brokenheartedly as European Jewry was destroyed, all while the quote-unquote developed and quote-unquote enlightened world stood silently by and wondered what to do about quote-unquote the Jewish question. Much like today, we look at all the enlightened, quote-unquote enlightened people, right? Who are like barbaric, like you like there's no moral clarity. It's like, whatever happened? Nothing. And you're wondering, where'd their brains go? No brains. Okay. These men had every right to be cynical about the world and the human condition and lose faith in the progress of history and humanity. Like, if anybody had a right to do that, if anybody knew, it is them. And yet, despite all they'd been through, both Rebbes steadfastly maintained this fundamental teaching throughout their period of leadership. The world is inherently good, intentionally crafted, and not only that, but beautiful too. Reality itself is a veritable work of sacred art. All right? Okay, so both, in their own way, committed every fiber of their beings to healing the broken spirit of a battered people and helping rebuild and renew their faith in God, His world, and creations one day at a time and one good deed at a time. Time and again, no matter what they faced in life, they stated loud and clear, the world is a garden. Its upkeep has been left in our care. So again, we're not here to be passive onlookers. We have to do the work of tending to the garden. No matter how littered the past is with our collective monstrosities and personal mistakes, we are each in essence eminently capable of revealing the holy sparks of light that lie scattered beneath the surface of a shattered world. Towards this end, we must each make sure to attune our perception to never lose sight of life's pristine beauty, nor forget whose hand fashioned its design. Again, stay focused on the reality, and I guess also on the goal, right? We're getting to a place where all of this is going to finally be completely revealed. We will see the garden blooming and beautiful. The weeds will be clear, right? We're working towards that, and we are getting actually closer and closer to that, even though it might seem that we're not, we actually are. This is our redemptive work as faithful gardeners, for which the Rebbe never stopped preparing us to always see good in the world, to always see God in the world, and to tend to his garden. Because, by the way, just like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, right? If you lose this perspective, then what happens is that you become weak, right? And despondent. And what that leads is that even if you're, the Alter Rebbe uses the analogy of that even if when the Yetzer Hara attacks you and takes you to this dark place of looking at the world with pessimism and all that, even if you could be if you're in a combat with another person, even the stronger opponent whose anemic state is low, he's going to lose the battle. Because again, the perceptive and the perception and the emotional state of the person is going to affect his strength. So for us to keep going forward, to really get to really achieve, to revealing the garden, we have to have the perspective. We have to know what we're doing, what we're working towards. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get up out of bed and do it. Okay? This fundamental spiritual mission statement, full of holy chutzpah and hope, came to the forefront of Jewish consciousness when it was most needed, rising like a phoenix from the smoldering ashes of hatred, fear, and genocide to inspire an army of like-minded illuminators. This was the Rebbe's way to banish darkness through light. So that is chapter 1. And chapter 2, he's going to start taking us on the journey of what he calls here, dwell on the positives. And then we're going to start dwelling on the positive. So before we wrap it up, we're going to leave that for next week. I want to share it with you because it's very interesting. I don't know why I'm thinking of this story. It's not really so related to what we covered, but it's, again, an Ashkacha brought this story, a divine providence story. So it's always good to share those. So you can only imagine, I'm standing at this JLI Shabbat in the Heights, and there's a lunch with 500 people. And I'm not exactly sure how. Maybe my husband went and introduced himself to some gentleman, or some gentleman overheard from somebody that we're from Houston. Not exactly. But the next thing I know is this man is talking to my husband and I and says, I hear you're from Houston. This is going to sound like a strange question, but would you happen to know a shul that has a mechitza that is made out of glass, that you cannot see through the glass, and its bottom is wood, and there's only a few made in all of the United States? And I'm thinking, yeah, but this is like, you should know this is the weirdest thing, because if you had asked any other person from Houston, they would have no idea what you're talking about, because happens to be that this is the mechitza of Chabad of West Houston. And it happens to be that we are extremely, okay. So then part of the story is not that had you met somebody else from Houston, they wouldn't have known, because Chabad of Uptown is pretty big. So yes, they would have known. I didn't know that Khani had ordered that mechitza, but I work very closely with Chabad of West Houston, and I know all the back and forth and I know intricately about this mechitza and getting it made and its pros and its cons and blah, 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 the whole thing. And they happened to ask us, of all people. Now, had he probably asked somebody else from my community, it's still funny, because they wouldn't have known, because they don't hang out in Chabad of Uptown. They don't hang out in Chabad of West Houston like me. So they wouldn't have known. So that was the funny part. So not only did we know, but we knew very well. We knew exactly who he needed to call. And we thought that was really like total Ashkacha Pratis, that of all the people he and all the random things, we actually not only know about the story, but know exactly who to put. So this week, the man figured out our email somehow online. He found it and he sent us an email, and I right away put him in touch. And the story is that he's looking to create, to gift this mechitza for his Chabad house and whatnot. And he's doing all the investigation and the research about this mechitza that's made in Israel. Only a few shuls in America has it, blah, blah, blah. And he's looking to, and he heard one of the places that has it is Houston, Texas. So he came to ask us. So we thought that was really cute. I think it was cute. At least we had a whole conversation with him about how God is right there, because what a funny way to connect. And yes, I ended up connecting them. So hopefully he'll get good reviews about the mechitza, and he'll end up giving it to his Chabad house. So that just happened 2 days ago. He wrote me an email, and I put him in touch with West Houston. So that's my story. Yes, so you're gonna see that's exactly right. And you're gonna see in some of the chapters that this theme comes out, that the garden also within us, like the soul reality of to me, that you tell me this because I was going through it like the last 7 days. I've been really, really off, like totally not myself, really very, very much not myself at all, like sluggish, not just not positive. I don't know. Like literally, like I told my husband, like I've been possessed. Like somebody send me back Yael. Like this is just not me. And like I actually made a doctor's appointment yesterday to get my hormones checked, to get everything like what is going on with me? Like, I called my friend, I said, I need the exorcist, I said something's going on. And we need to like start a share, you and I. Like I need to learn. And I like, obviously the classes that I'm teaching is not enough. Like I need more, like something. I was trying to look for all the things, and obviously you need more sleep and you need more exercise. But one of the things that I told them is, please, let's start learning a sikha a week. Let's just sit down. Let's learning inside, because whatever I'm listening to on the chitas, obviously something it's not enough. So thank you for reminding me that is so important. It's the truth. No, stop.
Yeah, 8:30 until 12.
Wow, good for you, Yocheved. Very
Yeah.
nice. Okay, anybody else? Any stories? Any questions? Okay, we're good. All right. Well, thank you for coming and joining me in this journey. I hope we gain a lot from this study of the book, and we'll see you next week. Beautiful week, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.